Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to start a brand new project. If you were following the 1949 Mercury M68, don't worry. It's winter in New Brunswick right now, and winter is kind of like the off season for my customer. So I gave him back the truck in October so he could drive it a little bit. And right now the project is going to be in the back burner. We still have a few things to finish, but that will be next spring. So there'll be more videos on that coming later. But right now I'm starting a brand new project for my own self, since it's winter and I'm trapped in the garage anyways. Ta-da! Okay, it's not a vintage car which I usually work on, but this is a 2006 BMW 650i that I picked up at a insurance auction, and I got it for a great deal because the engine in it is shot. So I bet you can tell what's coming. This thing is getting LS swapped. Okay, so she's not an M6, she's just a 6 Series, so it doesn't have the 5-liter V10, it has the 4.8-liter V8. Not the worst engine BMW ever made, but they did have some common issues with them. This one here, I don't know if the variable valve lift failed or if it jumped time and crashed into itself, but right now the engine won't even turn over. So I've also picked up a 5.3 LC9. In LS jargon, LC9 means it's an aluminum block 5.3 Gen 4 from a pickup truck. And I got it for 300 bucks. And the reason I got it for 300 bucks is the guy that owned it had it in his truck and it suffered a VLOM failure, which is very common on those. That's the displacement on demand system that fails all the time. So he bought a used engine and replaced the engine in his truck and sold that one as a core. Now, hopefully, if you replace that VLOM failure thing without driving it for too long, usually you can fix them. It doesn't break anything long term. If you keep driving it for a while, once the VLOM has failed, you get excessive valve lash. Eventually, your push rods can bend and actually jump over the side of the lifter, and that puts a lot of side loading on the lifter, so it tends to ruin the lifter bores. If that happens, you're looking for a new block. So hopefully this one is still fixable, because I was going to do a DOD delete anyways. Speaking of which, I do a poor man's DOD delete, so if you guys follow along for the next couple of episodes, I'll show you how I do that. And I'm also going to put won't say a wild cam, whatever, an intermediate cam, right? Because I plan on using the stock differential from the BMW, and because it's not an M6, the M6 used to have a beefed up rear end to take the power of the V10, but since this is just a base 6 Series, it only has the small differential that can only take about 475 horse maybe before it starts scattering its guts on the freeway. So I figure 5.3 cam headers, messing around with the tune a bit, it's probably going to be somewhere in the low 400 range, something like that. And I'm also going to put a 4L60. I know, okay. I bought a 4x4 4L60 because up here in New Brunswick, that is what's the most common thing. And I bought what I need to convert it back to two-wheel drive. But to do that, you have to take it all apart to go change the output shaft in the back. So since I'm going to have it all apart for that, I am going to rebuild the old thing, and I am going to replace some of the known weaknesses in the 4L60. A properly built 4L60 can take quite a bit of horsepower, and like I said, I'm not going crazy, I'm just staying in the 400-ish range. Right? So if you're interested in seeing that, I will also show you what I changed in that guy. Now, as far as the body goes, she's in relatively good shape. It does have a few spots, has a few spots on the other side as well, where somebody at some point did some body work to fix some minor dents, and I don't know if they didn't do their prep right, or if it's just because, the car is originally from Georgia, so I can only imagine what a black car in the Georgia heat does. But anyways, everywhere where the guy had put some Bondo, it actually cracked and peeled off. So that's going to be a few areas to fix, but other than that, it should be good. Funny thing about these, magnet, front fenders are plastic. Door skins are aluminum. That's metal. The interior is pretty good except for the dash. The dash is horrible. It is weather cracked worse than I've ever seen before. So I don't know too, because 6 Series BMW aren't exactly the most common of animals. So I don't know if I'll be able to find a replacement or if I'll just have to fix this one. I guess we'll just have to see. There's a couple of places where the headliner started coming unglued, but that shouldn't be too hard to fix. The seats are in very good shape. The door cards are good. The carpet's really good, right? Overall, the interior is in really good shape for the year. So that shouldn't be too bad. So, enough talking. I guess I better start wrenching. I'm gonna push her over to the hoist, start tearing her apart, pulling the drivetrain out of that, and we'll go from there.
20 minutes later.
Okay, finally got her on the hoist. This thing is not easy to push. A couple of things. First off, if you guys get one of these or any kind of BMW, most of them are not made to be lifted by the pinch wells. They have these specific lift points like this. And to use the lift points, you need to use some glorified hockey pucks that are made to register in those lift pads. They look like this. I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to find these. Why didn't they just put the lift pad flat? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. That's the whole point of German engineering. Right? So, another couple of things you can do on BMWs. These hood hinges are made to put the hood in the service position, which basically makes it stand completely straight up and down. Now, I've replaced these strut rods when I got the car because the ones that were on it couldn't even hold the hood up. I thought that was annoying. And I thought maybe the broken hockey stick prop rod was probably not the classiest thing on a BMW. They're pretty cheap. So what I'm gonna do is, right, factory one was about a foot long. I'll probably go to a place like Princess Auto, buy some cheap ones that are more like 15 inches long. So that should hold my hood up in the service position. But for now, I'm gonna get this guy up in the air and remove the exhaust and probably the drive shaft. So somebody at some point was kind enough to relieve this car of its catalytic converters, at least the precats. Right, so these BMWs have a pre-cat on each side that go to the exhaust manifold, and then they usually need here to have the actual cat, but this thing also had the cat replaced with 2 aftermarket resonators at some point. And it also came with factory, I don't know, this is probably metric, so it's like 55 mil, which is really close to 2 1/8. So I'm thinking I can probably take off these joints right here and go to 2 1/4 stainless pipe to go to my headers once I have the LS in, and I'll be able to keep, it's 2 1/8, but it's a true dual exhaust all the way to the back, which should be enough for the little 400 horsepower I'm going to run through it. So I'm going to start by taking this out, and then I'll have to take all of these heat shields out so I can get to the drive shaft. So, complete exhaust removed. She's quite heavy, especially at this end for some reason. You guys saw me on the video. I was thinking of putting the step ladder as a helper to support that end while I got this end down, but Once I got those two unhooked from the car, like just the weight of it is so unbalanced that I decided to ignore my helper, just drop it down. If ever you guys work on something like this, any kind of platform you're not familiar with, it's always a good idea to bag and tag everything. That way, if you end up reusing some of the fasteners or some of the parts, you know exactly which fastener goes where. So that speeds up your process immensely. But for now, let's remove some of those heat shields and get to our drive shaft. So at this end, the flange is held on by 3 bolts, and there's a little bit of space in between the mount and the transmission to slide a open-end wrench to grab the nut on the back of these. So you hold it with a wrench, take the 3 bolts out. Of course, our support has 2 bolts in it, and then at the differential end, so there's these 6 E-Torx bolts that are holding the flange to the yoke, and there's 2 little notches in the flange where you can actually shove a flat screwdriver and help pry the flange out of the yoke too. Now, once I get this guy off, this guy is steel, so I should be able to use the rear section as is, use the mid-mount, and then just modify the front section with a slip. The amount of horsepower I'm going to be driving through this thing is only going to be about 10-15% more than the stock 4.8 in this Beamer, so she should be good enough to hold that. There, drive shaft out. Like you guys might have seen me in the time lapse, I took the 2 bolts out of the center hanger, and I actually put another bolt back in that was the same thread size and pitch, but a longer bolt. That allows this thing to drop a little bit, which gives you a little bit more play. And then when I went to the back end at the differential, like this groove that I was talking about before was barely showing at first. So I tried to pry it with a screwdriver like I was saying, but my screwdriver really wasn't liking it. So I actually ended up taking a small chisel and a hammer and wedging it inside the groove to try to start them apart. And once it moved out a little bit, then I was able to go in with a pry bar and finish the job, remove that bolt that I had hanging, and the whole thing slid backwards and released the transmission. So I'll put this guy aside for now. It'll probably get cut right about here, and I'll put a front half with a slip yoke for a 4L60. Okay, so now that we're done with the undercarriage, time to move topside. So on these Beamers, the entire front end of the car is made to come off. So I'm going to take off the front bumper cover, the rad and fan, the radiator support, and disconnect everything I need to disconnect on this guy, and the engine and the transmission comes out as an assembly forward. So let's get into that. Well, that was fun. So I didn't record myself battling with the rat's nest of hoses. The way these things are plumbed is insane. But I did finally get my radiator out of the way, my oil cooler, all that stuff. I put the AC condenser to the side because this is actually still charged right now. For now, I'm going to try to take the AC compressor off and leave it laying on the frame. Do the same thing for my power steering pump. I'm probably going to remove the water-cooled alternator because we're not going to be reusing it. And then I'll pull the engine that way. I don't know if I'll be able to adapt my BMW AC compressor to the LS. I seriously doubt it, but whatever. For now, just in case, I'll leave it like that for now. But we are getting closer, so let's keep going. Okay, I've got the AC compressor off its bracket. Well, actually, I got the bracket off. In true BMW form, you take off the two bolts in the front. There's not enough room to take off the bolt in the rear because it hits the engine mount. So you take it off as far as you can get it, and then you can remove the bolts that hold the bracket to the block. And I've also got my water-cooled alternator off, but there's not enough room to pull it out of there. I couldn't get to the back bolt for the power steering pump, so I'm gonna wait till I raise the engine a bit. I should be able to reach it better that way, but before I do that, I'm gonna take one key measurement. Now this isn't the end-all be-all by any means, but if you can match the crankshaft centerline when you swap an engine, it'll help make the car behave in a more predictable way, if I can say. Like, just to give an example to make an extreme case for it, if you take a car that had a aluminum 4-cylinder engine in front and you swapped it for a cast iron V8, you've obviously made it a lot more nose heavy, right? You'll have more weight transfer when you brake, when you corner, that kind of stuff. So again, not an end-all be-all. If you have to cut out the front cross member and re-engineer the front suspension just to save yourself from raising the engine half an inch, by all means, raise the engine half an inch. But if you put your new engine in there and there's all kinds of room in there, if you're as close as possible to crankshaft centerline or a little bit lower, it'll lower the center of gravity of the car and make it handle possibly a little bit better. Whereas if you raise it, again, not the end-all be-all, but there's more chances that it handles a little bit funnier, whatever. So just to check it for a reference, I'm going to go, I have a piece of bar stock. Now, I don't know if you guys can see, there's like frame horns for this thing, and there's a flange at the bottom, so I'm going to rest my bar stock underneath the flanges, like so. And then my crankshaft center line is roughly 2 1/4 inches above that line. So 2 1/4 inches above the flanges underneath the frame horns. So when I put my LS in there, I'll see if I can match it or better.
346 minutes later.
Well, she's finally out. BMWs are fun to drive because they handle awesome, but they sure are a pain in the butt to work on. So a few corrections. I think I said before in the video that these things had a water-cooled alternator. Not that it matters, but this one doesn't. So I don't know if the inline 6 does and the V8 doesn't, or if it's just because this is the last generation of BMW that didn't have a water-cooled alternator. Not that it matters. We weren't going to use it anyways, but just to correct my own mistake. And secondly, and probably more importantly, I said that you could pull the engine and transmission out as a unit. That ain't going to happen. I tried and tried and tried, wedged the drivetrain in the hole, couldn't get in, slid it back in, took the transmission off the engine, slid it out from underneath the car, and even at that, when I tried to pull the engine back out, still wedged it between the steering rack and the bulkhead. So I ended up having to loosen the bolts for the subframe to lower the subframe about 1/2 inch, and that gave me just enough clearance to walk that guy out of there. But honestly, in retrospect, I think that if I ever had to do one of these again, that's how I do it. I would disconnect everything. I would take off the 3 nuts off from the top of the strut mounts, drop the subframe with the drivetrain attached to it, and drop it all as a unit and work on it on the floor when the car isn't around, because this was horrible. But she is finally out, and if you guys notice, this thing is huge.
That's what she said.
Right? From here to here, it is 29 inches wide. If we take the same measurement on an LS engine, it is barely 22. So that LS should have tons of room in there. The steering shaft shouldn't be a problem. There should be lots and lots of room. But that is going to be a problem for another day because I am beat. That's going to be it for this episode. Next episode, I'm going to start tearing into that LS. I'm going to do the cam swap, and I'm going to show you guys how I do my poor man's DOD delete. So I guess I'll see you next time in the garage.